Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast with Tania Vasallo. Before we get into this episode, I want to share with you that I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please rate, review, and share the podcast. And in exchange, and as my way to say thank you to you, I want to give you free access to my signature course called Manifesting Abundance, which typically sells for $997. All you have to do to gain access is leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, take a snapshot of it, and send it to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up with access to the course. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Melissa Milanak with us today. I met Dr. Melissa at a talk, and I have to preface this, and we'll go deeper with it, Dr. Melissa, but she had a talk. It was with Morgan Stanley. I've gone to several of these talks here in town, and I thought it was going to be about finances. So I just discovered that it was about sleep as I was going to the talk. And I'm like, oh, here, I kind of roll my eyes. I have to admit, I'm like, sleep, really? I've been trying to master this sleep thing for the past 3 years. And I really thought that you were just going to tell us to make the room darker, make the room cooler, no screens, go to bed earlier, yada, 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 and all the things that I've
things
tried.
that you can Google in here.
Yes. So welcome. I am so excited to have you because you blew my mind when I saw you at that talk. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I am so excited to have the chance to be here. I am glad that I exceeded your expectations and surprised you a bit. And I'm excited to hear, to share a lot of this information with your listeners today.
Yes. I mean, tell us a little bit about your background, who you are. And I know you have a TED Talks too about sleep because I went and listened to it, and I had my husband listen to it because he wasn't in that room. So I was like, anyone that's struggling with sleep, which I'd say it's like 90% of people that hit middle age, or going into their 40s. And for women, we have the added bonus of menopause or perimenopause, if that's one of your symptoms. So, but how did you get into this whole world? Like, what's your background? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Well, so I'm a licensed clinical psychologist by training, and my career actually started out in the world of working with trauma and PTSD. And so I was debating doing which direction I was going to go. Did I want to go to medical school to do a PhD, clinical psychology work? And 9/11 had occurred. And I started doing a lot of work in the trauma PTSD space. And so for the last now over 23 years, I've worked back and forth in Northern Ireland, doing work there, learning about trauma, PTSD, work with the Troubles. Spent the last 6 years back and forth working in South Africa, working with communities that were displaced during apartheid and creating treatments, working with children and adolescents, and learning about how there's just such this connection between individuals that have experienced traumatic life events and experiencing stress and how it impacts their sleep. So through that process and through many years, completed a PhD in clinical and community psychology, started doing work really looking at the intersection between trauma and sleep. As I learned, as I said, over 92% of people with PTSD have sleep problems. And it's not just nightmares, but it is the insomnia, the difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up, all of these concerns. So as I started doing more and more into that intersection and really learning more about sleep many years ago, I realized that sleep truly was such an important aspect for everyone's life, for your mental health, for your physical health, just for your ability to enjoy life. When you haven't had a good night's sleep, so it's really hard sometimes to find full joy in things. And so started doing more work in the sleep space, then started doing consulting, working beyond just the medical realm of doing research and seeing patients, but doing consulting, working with businesses and organizations. And then I started my own company. And so many years later, now I get to travel around the world teaching people to sleep better and stress less.
I love it. We need you. Where have you been these last 3 years, Dr. Melissa? I love this. And I love that you went down the rabbit hole, with your curiosity and that intersection of PTSD and sleep, because I love my sleep and I feel for anyone that's had any type of trauma. And because for me, not having traumas, maybe like stress, it's first world problems, right? And not being able to sleep, I'm miserable, when I don't have a good night's sleep. So it's so important. Can we go down that path a little bit of just
Yeah.
why it's so important? And then I'll ask you to, of how many hours of sleep do we really need? Those kind of questions that are myths, maybe, that we can go down that rabbit hole.
No, of course. I think that's exactly the point, is that sleep is such an important aspect for all of our lives. I love to share. I've heard many sleep experts say that sleep is the secret superpower that we all have access to, but very few of us harness it. And the majority of us actually deprioritize our sleep because our schedules are so busy and we're trying to fit everything else in. And what is the first thing that many times ends up going? Because, oh, I want to stay up a little bit longer. I need a break. I need to do these things. I need to fit my workout in. But that's what's so interesting, is that when we're not getting enough sleep, first we see that it's going to impact us for our physical health. So I know we have a lot of ladies listening, and there's lots that we can talk about impact for their hormones, and with a whole other conversation we can get into. For gentlemen listening, 1 hour of less sleep a night can actually age them 11 years in testosterone. So a 39-year-old is functioning as a 50-year-old. Our workouts stop working for us. Our bodies can actually break down muscle and hold on to fat if we're not getting enough sleep, because it's actually wanting to use the fat to fuel as an energy source because we don't have enough energy because we're not getting enough sleep. And that's just physical health, between our immune system, heart health, so many things we could discuss there. And then we get into our brains and how our brains function and those pieces. We need our sleep for our cognitive performance, our memory, focus, and attention. And when we sleep, it's when our brain takes out the trash. So literally, our 3-pound brain produces over 5 pounds of toxins that it puts out each year. And that has to be washed away to help our brain to function at its optimal best. And when we're not getting certain kinds of sleep and the right amount of sleep, then our brain can't do that. So those toxins build up. That's why we see, for instance, relationships with early onset Alzheimer's and dementia and cognitive decline, not to mention our ability to regulate our emotions and many other things, our immune system, our metabolism, and even how we respond to challenges. So I know we talked at the meeting when we met. That's why we see the days after daylight savings, a 24% increase in heart attacks. And we also see an increase in car accidents from 1 hour on one night. So sleep pervades everything. That's where, as we talk from a mental health standpoint, when you help people to sleep better, you can see reductions in anxiety, depression, suicidality, addictions, trauma, all of these pieces. So at the end of the day, so much is important. We need to eat healthy and exercise, but we need to get our sleep right so that everything else can fall into place.
Wow, there's just so many layers here that I want to go deeper into.
We need about 10 podcasts to cover
I
all the
know.
topics.
I'm like, could we break it down into several different episodes here? But let's talk a little bit about what I mentioned at the beginning. Like, to me, I thought, when I was researching and doing, when I started not sleeping 2 or 3 years ago now, and I love sleeping and I am a sleeper. And if I can get 8 hours, great. If I can get 9, oh my God, I'm in heaven. Like, I just, in my head, as soon as it hits the pillow, I fall right asleep. So when I was having issues waking up in the middle, the issue's not falling asleep, that I'm out in less than a minute. But it's waking up in the middle of the night. I started researching all these things, like I was saying, the dark room, the cool room. I tried everything: melatonin, CBD, THC, glass warm milk, the golden milk, all these things. And why is it not just that? That's just like scratching the surface. That's what I got out of hearing you speak, Dr. Melissa. It was like, oh my God, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to work on here. So can you dismantle it a little bit for our listeners and know that it goes much deeper than just, no screens an hour before and all these other things?
Of course. And you hit on a really important point, because there are all these different pieces that come together and that do impact our sleep. Sleep hygiene is important. We do want the room to be dark. We do, all these pieces, but there are some underlying fundamental components of sleep and how sleep works that really play a role in that. So, for instance, one of the first questions you had asked a few minutes ago was, how much sleep do we need? Well, the first thing is that different people need different amounts of sleep, and the amount of sleep changes over the course of our lives. And so, just like a shoe size is an average, right? And we have the average shoe size in the different countries. Well, sleep is the same. So, 8 is an average. There are some that need more, and there are some that need less. And those that need more barely afford themselves with the 7 or 8 hours to get it, and they wake up and they feel tired and they're dragging, and now they're trying to incorporate, well, I need my cup of coffee to stay awake. Oh, I need, this thing to help me fall asleep, whether it's a glass of wine or a supplement. And so now we're chemically altering what our body's supposed to be doing naturally. We have those that need less than 8 hours, and they might wake up after 6 or 7 hours and feel amazing, but then they look at the clock and they immediately feel tired. And so, because our brain can do an override, and then we put so much pressure on ourselves. Well, what's interesting with that is that also the amount of sleep that we need changes over the course of our lives, how much sleep we need and when we feel tired. And we can talk more about that if you want to go into that direction. But what happens is that for many people, the things that they're doing that they think make their sleep better can actually make it worse. So I know, and this is what kind of ties into some of the underlying, one of the core components of getting better quality sleep is to actually determine what we call your sleep window. And that is how much sleep you need and when to get it. And so what happens is for many of us, we have decided what that window should be, and it doesn't map on to what our body and brain actually needs. So now it's, oh, well, it takes me, for those that have trouble falling asleep, well, it takes me about an hour or two to fall asleep. I better get in bed 2 hours earlier than I want to. I'm waking up all these times throughout the middle of the night. Now I need to extend my window. Well, it's like the pizza example, if you don't mind me sharing that for a second, that we talked about. So for the listeners, one of the things I said is, say that you have family and friends that are coming over for dinner. And so we're in the States, we'll use inches for the moment. We have 6 inches of pizza dough. We spread it out into a 6-inch pie pan. It's nice and thick and even. But now we hear that more people are coming. So we have to take those 6 inches of pizza dough and stretch it to make it fit into a 10-inch pie pan. And we can make that happen. We want to feed everyone, but the dough isn't as even as it used to be. It now has holes and gaps because there wasn't enough to fit the space and we were overstretching it. And that's what happens with our sleep, is we have to build up enough sleepiness to fill the space. Well, if I've only built up 6 hours of sleepiness throughout the day, if my body only needs 6 hours, but I'm trying to make it fit into a 10-hour window because I want to get in bed earlier because it's cold outside, my bed's comfortable, I want to hide from my kids, whatever it is. Maybe it's the weekend and you're like, but I don't want to get up at 6. I want to sleep till 9. I've earned that retirement. Well, now when we're stretching that window, of course it's harder to fall asleep. Or we're exhausted, we're falling asleep, but of course we're waking up more times throughout the night, or we're waking up earlier than we want to because we don't have enough sleep to fill the entire space. And so that's why one of the fundamental things to really start to fix our sleep is we need to reduce the window to match the sleepiness that we have and what we're getting. We're not depriving you of sleep. We're not telling you that if you need 6 hours, I'm only giving you 5. But if you only need 6 hours, you don't need to spend 8 hours in bed getting it. When we become more efficient sleepers, not only are we less frustrated, but our sleep quality improves because we have these stages of sleep that we need to go through this whole process. And every time we wake up, we restart the process, which ends up reducing our ability to get the type of sleep that we need that happens further along in the process. So as we adjust the amount and the time and we get better quality instead of just quantity sleep, it's the same thing with food. You can eat a whole bag of potato chips and you've gotten calories, but is that as healthy as the fruits and vegetables and the protein that you might need?
I love this because no one's ever shown me that analogy with like food. Like I almost see it as like, are you getting junky sleep or are you getting, healthy sleep, and those
Yes.
habits like you're saying, and no one really teaches us that. So let me ask you, would it be fair to say it's almost like tell ourselves a better story about our sleep so that we can start creating a new way of sleeping? Because when I look at it, coming from the premise that I thought first, myth number one, we all need 8 hours. So the story I've been telling myself is I need 8 hours and I love 9. And then now, going into perimenopause and these last 3 years, maybe I don't need 8 hours anymore. Like my body has shifted and it's at a place of Because as frustrating as it's been, waking up some nights at 3:30, 4 in the morning and being on a 6 hour sleep, because what I start doing is like, well, I'm going to go to bed earlier. And then I'd play with like, let me go to bed later, like, let me go to 10. Yeah. So I was stretching it in every direction, that pizza dough. But then I realized that I was still, it's not like I was miserable with 6 hours of sleep. I was like, I can function. And I actually kind of enjoy the house being quiet, at a 3:30 or 4 o'clock wake up. Now I'm going to the gym, at 5:30. But so it's almost like telling myself a new story of like, okay, well, I've realized at this age and in this moment in time, I really only need 6 hours. So now I can decide, do I want to go to bed at 9? Do I want to go to bed at 10? Would that be fair to say, Dr. Melissa, that we can start analyzing and see what kind of story and understand what phase we are in life and how many hours we might need for sleep?
I think that's a great way to think about it because so much of what happens is, to use the phrase, the story that you're telling yourself is this pressure. Okay, well, I have to get this amount of sleep. Well, if you think about it, maybe you had a big meeting the next day, or you have something important, and what do you do to yourself? You get in bed, you're like, okay, I have to sleep well tonight. And then what happens? You don't sleep well because now you've put all this pressure on it. So many times, some of it is taking that pressure off yourself and realizing even if I don't sleep incredibly well this one night, I've had one night in my life where I didn't sleep well and I still functioned okay the next day. Let me look at those data points. Let me realize that if I didn't sleep well one night, I'm probably going to sleep well the next night. If I miss lunch, I'm going to be more hungry at dinner. So it doesn't mean that I'm never going to eat again. It doesn't mean that I'm never going to sleep again. And so it's kind of this mixture because on one hand, we know that we need to get enough sleep for our body and our brain to be healthy and to heal and to restore. But sometimes we take that to the other extreme. And if we have one night where we don't sleep incredibly well, now we've put so much pressure on ourselves that it becomes difficult to sleep. Because now every time we see our bed, we see that stress, we see that pressure. We start thinking to ourselves, okay, well, I need to sleep. And how much sleep do I need to get? Instead of letting it be this relaxing oasis, this thing where our body is healing and repairing itself. And to that point, the amount of sleep that we need does change over the course of our lives. We think about what sleep is needed for that restoration, that healing, that repair. Well, think about how much sleep a newborn gets versus a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old. We hit a certain stage of our life, we're not having the growth spurts anymore. I always joke and say other than our waistlines, and those are trying to stop. But in general, we're not having that same growth spurt where we need that sleep for repair. And if we are equating it looking at food, think about portion sizes. Think about the senior specials and the size of food because we don't need as many calories to fuel the body if we're not as active. Well, if we're not as physically active, we don't need as much time sleeping to heal the body because we didn't do damage to it and how active our brain is. And so that's why part of it is to see. Now, right now, it's almost where, and I know we'll talk later about how do we really determine our sleep window and that 4-step process, because that's a big piece of it is figuring out what does your body need. It may be that you always needed 9. Now, maybe you need 7, but we need to almost do a sleep detox and squeeze out all of those awakenings and get ourselves to the place where we figure out what our body really needs. And then we can slowly expand that window back out to that ideal level instead of just spending all these hours in bed being awake and being frustrated.
Oh my God. Again, thank you so much for explaining this because I've never heard any sleep experts, explaining it this clearly, like junk sleep,
Here.
the amount of sleeps that we need, like everything is so generalized. And I feel like that's what's been part of the problem is that I feel like what's that expression in English? Like the square peg in the round hole, like I have to
Yes.
squeeze myself into the 8 hours and oh my God, now I'm not sleeping that. And so I put all this pressure on myself. We're going to take a quick pause and we're going to come back to this because this is getting very, very interesting. If you're enjoying today's episode and you'd like to support the podcast and treat yourself to a little adventure, I've got something special for you. Every month, I'm giving away a complimentary 7-night, 8-day vacation, and you get to choose from over 3,000 incredible resorts around the world. Imagine relaxing on the beach, exploring new places, or taking that dreamiest break you didn't even know you needed. Entering is easy. Just rate and review the Courage to Be on Apple Podcasts. Want to increase your chances of winning? Head over to my YouTube channel and leave a comment on each episode you watch. Every single comment counts as an additional entry. Once you've done that, email your screenshot to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and you'll find that address in the show notes too. It only takes a minute, and your next vacation might be closer than you think. Okay, so we're talking about the different amounts of sleeps. Could we go over like an average? And again, we're using and emphasizing the word average. It doesn't mean that everyone needs this amount. Like, so think about it for yourself too. What does, being a mom of, oh, she's almost 12, my daughter now, like what amount of sleep for our listeners if they have a baby or a toddler or, like teenagers, adults, then maybe menopause for women, and going a little bit later, like what would be on average that we can look like, oh, I'm close to it, or I'm not, or that makes sense why I'm in this stage right now.
Sure. So what's interesting is whenever we're talking about sleep, many times you'll hear me say it depends. And not to give an unsatisfactory answer, but because there is so much that truly does depend for how our bodies are wired, our genetics, as well as just our physical activity level and the things that we are doing. So I could have two individuals that are the same age, but if one is, for instance, training for a marathon, they're going to need more calories to fuel their body. They're going to need more sleep to be keeping their body healing. So there are generals, and the typical ranges. I always shy away from the word normal because there's such variety. And when we have these conversations, obviously what I'm sharing with you today is for what I'll say the typical sleeper. There are obviously going to be variations based on people's health. For instance, we know that the average for the typical adult is usually 7 to 8 hours of sleep that is needed. That range, 7 to 8. Well, there are people, for instance, called short sleepers. And so when we talk about how sleep works, and maybe after we're done with this, I can take a minute and talk about kind of the process of sleep and the stages of sleep. But there are some people that are going to cycle through that quicker. And so they are only going to need about 6 hours to get the same amount of healing and repair that someone else might need 8 hours to do the same. And so there's those variations. Now, what is interesting is typically as we said, by the time we get to that typical adult, we're thinking, kind of 30s, 40s, 50s, in those ranges. We are seeing that 7 to 8 hours. A few things that I think when we talk about our younger individuals is that what a lot of people don't realize is that the brain doesn't actually finish fully developing until the mid-20s. We usually see about age 24 to 27, and there's a range from when women's brains tend to finish maturing and men's, and we will leave all of those humor out from that. But the last parts of the brain, by the way, that fully develop, it's judgment, decision-making, and impulse control. So we'll leave that for the time being. But we'll see that even for like from your high schoolers and your college students, even up through the early 20s, while they're still having all this cell growth and regeneration and for the brain, a lot of times people are still needing about 9 to 10 hours of sleep, at least 8 to 9. So for our high schoolers and for our college students, especially where they're using their brains and learning and working and active, we're still seeing a need for about at least 8 to 9 hours. But at that stage, they're barely getting 7, maybe 8, because we're getting up early and we're getting to school and we have our extracurriculars and our homework, but they're not getting tired until later. And so that's something that I think is really important to note is our circadian rhythm, that part of our system that controls when we feel awake and alert and when we feel more tired and sleepy, that most people, we have this schedule throughout the day of when we're feeling awake and when we're feeling tired. Well, that window of awakeness and sleepiness actually adjusts for us throughout the course of our lives. So we'll see, for instance, if you take centuries ago, and you take these communities and tribes and villages and such, who were the individuals that were protecting the community? It was usually those teens. They would hit puberty and they were the ones that were the fighters and those hunters and the gatherers. Well, we want them to be awake when there's the highest risk of threat. And when is that normally happening? 10 o'clock, 11, 12 o'clock at night when it's dark out. So we don't want them to feel sleepy. We want them to be ready and on guard to protect the vulnerable. So once we're seeing our teenagers and our adolescents once they're hitting puberty and kind of that 12, 14, we start to see this shift where they're not getting tired until later. They're staying, their body naturally, its survival is keeping them awake until 12, 1 in the morning. That's why your teenagers aren't tired later at night, but then they're supposed to be able to fall asleep around 1, 2 in the morning and be able to sleep even through it being light outside so they can get their 9 or 10 hours, which is why they're sleeping till 10 or 11 or 12. It's not just that they're lazy, but it's that's how their body is wired. And then as we get older, we become tired earlier and earlier because we want to be sleeping while they're awake to protect us. And then we want to wake up when they're going to bed and it's starting to get light out so we can protect them. Think of your college towns and when the bars and restaurants are open versus the early bird specials in retirement communities. When are we eating? When are we sleeping? So it's not just the amount, but it's the when, and that adjusts over the course of our lives, which is also determining why we sometimes when we're waking up when we do.
This is fascinating to me, and we will go more in depth in another episode, of just like how to shorten that window of sleep. So if you're listening to this, make sure to listen to the follow-up episode of getting into the intricacies of it and how we can fix that up for us, and not stretch that pizza dough like Dr. Melissa was saying. I wanted to ask you about, this is fascinating about the teenagers wanting to go to bed later to me, and especially as a mom she's preteen, but now trying to understand it, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, she wants to stay up later. I want to go to bed earlier because I want to enjoy the early hours of the morning to myself, the quietness. But I was going to ask you about any stories with the people that you've worked with, with PTSD or any other types of trauma, because I mean, I just can't even imagine for people that have had like a severe trauma and that this has been ongoing for them for months, years, at a time,
Mhm.
and being desperate of just like, well, I don't know how to fix it. Because to me, anyone that's been a parent and has gone through that lack of sleep, for months at a time, years at a time, and how miserable you are, just emotionally and stuff. Like, I just can't even fathom, because then that passes. But for the person that's had some type of trauma or that has suffered from insomnia from all these years, can you share some stories of how you were able to help them out?
Sure. So there's a wide variety here because when you take, for instance, when you're talking from a trauma standpoint, for instance, if we're honest and without going too far down those rabbit holes, for some people, the bed was the site of the trauma. So if somebody was assaulted, for instance, and so now that, how do you transition that where you're associating that with the space and the location where something horrible happened? And every time you're in that space, it brings up those memories and those experiences. So some of it is how do we change the way that we look at the bedroom and how do we adjust where we're sleeping. For other people that have experienced significant traumas that are maybe not in that space or that time of day where nighttime can be more scary and such, or for people because things that have happened and so they don't want to sleep at night because that's when this terrible thing happened to them. So now we're going to try to drink as much caffeine or do other type of medication and such to try to keep ourselves awake because that's when that time of night things have happened. Additionally, for some people, and what we see with trauma and PTSD specifically is that many times avoidance is a really key kind of symptom that we see. We start avoiding people, places, things that either trigger us to remember what had happened or that can provoke us to have those emotional experiences. And so, because we try to avoid thinking about it during the day, well, once we go to sleep, now we can't control what we're thinking about. And so our brain is trying to make sense and heal. And so that's when we start seeing it manifesting in nightmares. Our brain wants to problem solve for us. We see this happening positively. I could tell you stories and stories like Mendeleev with the periodic table and musicians with getting ideas for songs that we're struggling with something during the day. And when we're sleeping, our brain is trying to work it out for us. And those are positive options. But we also see people that have had these negative and painful traumatic experiences. And while we're avoiding it during the day, well, then it comes up at night. So there are going to be opportunities where, as you're helping people to be able to work through the trauma and reduce the association with that anxiety and with that pain that they've experienced, to help them to be able to start to associate the bed and the bedroom with rest and relaxation, to help them to deal with things when they're awake, so then that at night their brain can truly rest. So I could tell you story after story of helping individuals to be able to literally shut their brain off. I'm thinking of some of the military veterans that I had worked with that, they were only sleeping 2, 3 hours a night. And, through doing some of these strategies, now they're sleeping 6, 7 hours a night. So there's lots of different stories that I can share along the way. A lot of parents that when you first have your child, you're surviving. You're sleeping when the baby's sleeping and you're drinking your coffee and you might have a glass of wine at night and you're trying to do everything. And now your kiddo's sleeping through the night and you're not. So I can tell you story after story of the parents of just helping them to be able to restructure their sleep, even just giving people hope back that you can take back control over your sleep. That even if you haven't slept well for weeks, months, years, it doesn't mean that you're hopeless. Just because you've been taking medication or self-medicating to try to sleep doesn't mean that we can't help you to be able to reset your body on that. I mean, for doing this for over 20 years, there are endless stories from kiddos and individuals with trauma and addiction and such to just a typical hardworking entrepreneur that just feels like they can't sleep because if they don't work, who's going to get it done? And I think that's why I'm so passionate about the idea and the topic of sleep is you can truly, I've been able to see this work, as I said, from professional athletes to spec ops military, stay-at-home moms, retirees, everything under the sun. And when you help people to sleep better, you can truly help give them their lives back.
That is beautiful. What's one that really stands out for you, whether it's parent or a veteran or something?
Oh my goodness. Well, as I was sharing, there was a veteran who literally had not slept well since literally, this was going back a number of years, but since the Vietnam War, and was literally waking up was literally getting maybe 2 to 3 hours of sleep at night. And that was it. And then was trying to nap throughout the day and didn't have the energy. And literally by working through the process of something called CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, it was purely done behaviorally treatment therapy. We were able to help him because he didn't want to take the medications and didn't want to have to, because he wanted to be able to do this naturally. Within about, I'd say 3 to 4 weeks, we really started to see improvement. And by the end of 6 weeks, he was getting about 6 hours, 6.5 hours of sleep at night. And this had been decades of not sleeping well. That stands out to me. I'm thinking of a mom that had been through a lot of medical procedures and had a kiddo that had been really sick and spent months and months in the hospital just caring by her young toddler's bedside. And, literally every small little noise was waking up, was maybe getting 20 minutes at a time because she was constantly on guard and wanting to make sure that her child was okay. And within I'd say about 4 to 5 weeks, she started out getting, first about 3 to 4 hours and then 5 to 6. And now she's getting a good solid 7 to 8. And so just being able to see those impacts, I'm just thinking out the top of my head, at an individual with a severe addiction. And that was another one that was going through detox with alcohol and substances. And by the time we got through the 4 weeks of an intensive outpatient program, they went from having to medicate to being able to fully be detoxed and not having to use the substances to be able to sleep, getting up to about 7 hours a night. And I ran into them 2 years later, and they literally said to me that they hadn't relapsed. It was the first time in their life they hadn't started using. They said really sleeping made all the difference.
Wow. Thank you for sharing those stories. It's like, and it sounds like it's one of hundreds, if not thousands of the ones that if people that you've helped it. Wow. The impact of that. If we could all sleep better in society, I think our culture, our world would look very different, because of the emotional stress, the dependency like that on substances, the depression, like just all these other things that show up from it. And you said this is all CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy. What is it?
So it's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia,
Insomnia.
CBT-I. And so the American Academy of Sleep Medicine recognizes it as the gold standard treatment to help people to really get their sleep back on track. We're talking about the people that have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up early, feeling exhausted during the day, just helping us to take back control over it. And, I think it ties in, as we were talking earlier, just having the courage to take that first step. It can be really scary to say, okay, I'm going to make these behavioral changes instead of taking this medication, for instance, or what's going to happen if I don't have that drink to put myself to sleep. And so It's just for everything. It takes the courage to be able to take those first steps, but it's amazing to see the decades and decades of the data behind it showing that people truly can take back control over their sleep, which then impacts their heart health and their brain health and just the ability to enjoy life and engage with people. We see the impacts on relationships, on parenting relationships, friendships, and even productivity at work just by improving our sleep.
Amazing. Oh, you totally opened up a whole new world for me with this, Dr. Melissa. Just because as you were saying that with the cognitive behavior, like it's so much easier to rely on a pill. And I went down that path. I was like, okay, let me try melatonin, let me try CBD, let me try THC, let me try, valerian root, let me try, like everything. Give me a list. I tried everything of
Yeah.
these, but it's almost like the easy way out, but because I didn't have the information, I always say that you do better when you know better, right? And so to me, I didn't know better. I was like, this has to be a pill thing. And it's kind of the parallel, the way I see it is almost like wanting to lose weight and live a healthy lifestyle and just like, okay, go to my doctor, give me a pill versus let me try, like, can I eat healthier? Can I exercise? Like, what kind of exercise do I like? That's more behavioral and it requires more effort, but it seems like the outcome is much bigger.
And I think to your point, that's where there's a lot that comes down to medication standpoint, right? There are going to be some individuals that they truly do need to take the medication. There's something that's happened within their body chemically, or as they've gotten older, we're seeing deficiencies in certain supplements and such. Just like people will take a vitamin B or a vitamin C or whatever else. And so I'm not saying that there's never the case for it, but I
Mhm.
can tell you that the majority of cases that I see, it could be fixed to your without having to rely on the chemicals and the supplements and the medications, or not even the same amount. Because even the people that are using them, many times they're not using them correctly. And then they're saying, and then it also reduces their hope because now they're feeling like, okay, great, yet again, this doesn't work for me either. It's hopeless and can sometimes, unfortunately, reinforce the opposite message. So I do think that it's important to note that there's so much from a behavioral standpoint, and with things like CBTI, that the majority of cases, for most people, you can start sleeping better without having to be reliant on external supplements. But for those that do need it, it's using it the right way, making sure that we're not just relying on that, as you said, for the quick fix. It's really figuring out the individualized needs instead of just, oh, great, this is the next thing. Let me try, this pill because I just want to shut my brain off, instead of realizing the underlying reasons why these things are happening.
Yeah, and it's not only that, I'm remembering like CBD would work for me and THC too, like I'd have like a sleeping gummy, a cannabis gummy,
Mhm.
and I'd wake up the next morning not super grogged out, but kind of grogged out. So then now I rely on coffee and I'm not a coffee drinker. So it really opens
Perpetuates the
it.
cycle.
Yes, yes, that's what I was trying to get to. Like that if I wish I would have known this 3 years ago. I mean, I know it now, so I'm practicing all these things. And when I heard you speak the first time and giving us all these tips, which we'll get in this next episode, I started practicing them. And within 1 week, I started seeing the changes. I was like, oh my God, where has Dr. Melissa been all these years? And this has just been with like some tips that she's given us at a talk, so to me, it's amazing the work you're doing. We need to spread this word more out there for people to know. So if you're listening to the podcast and you got in one golden nugget from this, stay tuned and listen to the next episode. And definitely share with anyone that you know in your life that might be struggling with sleep, like direct them into this space. So where can people find you and become part of your community or learn more about the work you're doing, Dr. Melissa?
Yes, well, thank you. So I do have my website, and you can either go through mindimpactconsulting.com, which is my company, or just through my name, melissamilanek.com. They both go to the same place. And on there, you can get all different information. I have a library of over 200 videos with 3-minute quick little tips and strategies for sleep and stress. My sleep well guide that I know all of your listeners will get access to for free, to be able to give them all different tips and strategies. And then I'm on all social media. So between LinkedIn and Instagram and the different platforms where I post many different articles and different related information. And if anybody listening here has follow-up questions, they're welcome to connect with me through that. And for being one of your listeners, they'll be able to get a free consultation.
Yay! Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time here. One last question that I love asking my guests. What can people do to live a life with more courage?
Well, I think that the first piece, making the decision to do it anyway. And what I mean by that is that what I see is for so many people, we can come up with all of the reasons why we shouldn't do something. Oh, I have a busy week. I shouldn't try to have the courage to adjust my sleep this time. Or I have this thing I really want to do, but do I have the skill set for it? And so I feel like it's having the courage to, even if you don't have everything perfect, and even if you don't know exactly how it's going to have that, so the fear of failure, have the courage to do it anyway, and you'd be surprised by what the outcomes could be, even if you can't predict them.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Melissa.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Sleep well and sweet dreams.
If you loved today's episode, it would mean so much if you rate and review The Courage to Be on Apple Podcast. Not only does it help the show to grow, but it also gets you in the running for something amazing. Every month, I draw one lucky winner to receive a complimentary 7-night, 8-day vacation. You'll get to pick from over 3,000 beautiful resorts worldwide. You just cover the taxes and fees like you would with a travel rewards. Airfare is not included. And if you want to double your chances, along with your Apple Podcast review, leave a couple of comments on YouTube. That counts as a second entry. Just send your screenshots to help.thecouragetobe@gmail.com, and you'll find the email in the show notes too. It only takes a moment, and who knows, your next adventure might be closer than you think. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on our next episode of the Courage to Be podcast.